All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining this afternoon. My name is Diana, and we are here with Diane Javelli, a clinical dietitian, presenting her information on nutrition and digestive wellness. So without any further ado, I'll go ahead and turn things over to our presenter. A few housekeeping rules, though, before we begin. We'll ask that there will be some time at the end for a Q&A. So please feel free to save any questions that you have to the very end, and we'll be answering questions as they come up as well, as appropriate during the presentation. But there will be time at the end for a Q&A. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Diane.
You're welcome. Okay, well, we're gonna dive right in because we have a lot to cover. And of course, sorry, my phone's ringing again, so let me see if I can turn that down. Okay, so I am going to talk about nutrition and digestive wellness. And first, I want to talk a little bit about what is normal digestion. Diana, can you hear me okay?
Yes, can hear you just fine.
Okay, great. So often people ask that when they come to me. It's like, well, how do I know if this is even normal? And so I want to spend just a few minutes talking about that. So just some averages. And I apologize if you guys are eating lunch because this is a sensitive topic. So if you are squeamish, just kind of cover your ears for the first few slides, and then we'll get into talking more about food. But the average amount of gas that people tend to have can be anywhere from a half to a liter per day. Normal bowel movements, there's really not one thing that the health organizations define as normal. It can be anywhere from 3 times per day to 3 times per week. It kind of depends on what's normal for you. And transit time, from the time you eat something until the time it comes out the back end, it can be anywhere from 48 to 96 hours. So a little bit about digestion in general. When we eat something, we start mixing in saliva into our food, and our saliva has enzymes in it that help start to break down things like carbohydrate. So it's really important to have good digestion, to make sure that you chew really well. That's the beginning of it. And then as our food goes down into our esophagus, it contracts and squeezes and moves the food down to our stomach. In our stomach, our food gets mixed up and broken down chemically by acid and enzymes in the stomach. And then the stomach also mechanically churns and mixes and helps break down our food and getting it ready for the small intestine, which is where all of our nutrition, all of our carbohydrate, calories, everything is absorbed from our food in our small intestine. We have about 20 feet or so of small intestine. So the food has to move all the way through that before it gets down to the large intestine. And in the large intestine, even though we're not really absorbing any nutrients out of our food at that point, for the most part, the bacteria or gut microbiome that lives or is housed in our large intestine, they start working on some of the remnants or waste products of food that we didn't digest. And there's lots of great things that happen when they get a hold of those waste products. So we'll talk more about that. So what your poo says about you: color. Typical color tends to be brown, sometimes green, depending on how much bile has been in the stool. Black can mean that there's blood in your stool, but it could also be from taking iron supplements or charcoal tablets or eating lots of dark berries because you couldn't resist those blackberries that were growing out in your backyard, or even things like Pepto-Bismol can turn your stool blackish. Red could be bright red blood from things like hemorrhoids, but it could also be from eating beets or lots of red berries or even food with red dye. And then green, we talked about the bile aspect, but it also could happen when you eat lots of green foods or something with green food coloring, or even blue food coloring sometimes can tend to make your stool look on the green side. And then yellow or tan could be, especially if it's accompanied with greasy looking stools or smelly stools, could indicate there's some fat malabsorption, gallbladder issues. Same with white or gray stools, that would be unusual. Bottom line, no pun intended, that if there's a change in your stool color from what's normal for you, and it's consistent and persistent change, then you should talk to your doctor about it. If you ever see blood, I always tell people, talk to your doctor about it. Okay, and what your poo says about you shape. This is a Bristol stool scale, so you've probably seen this with from your doctor's office or other places, but stools can range anywhere from type 1 to type 7. And generally, if you look at the green area, type 3 to 4, where it's kind of smooth and soft and sausage-like, that's considered more normal and healthy. But some people tend to be a little bit more type 2 or type 5. And again, if that's normal for you and your doctor's not concerned about it, then that's just the way it is. But if it changes, again, and it's persistent and consistent change, like you all of a sudden you're always type 3 and you go to type 7 and you're staying at type 7 for extended periods of time, then you need to have a chat with your doctor. Okay, and then undigested foods. The other thing that I often hear from folks is, I think that maybe I'm malnourished or I'm malabsorbing. I see food come out of my stool. So does that mean that I can't absorb food, or does it mean that I'm not getting enough nutrition? And sometimes it can mean that, but most of the time, if it's a high fiber thing like corn or raspberry seeds, tomato seeds, beans, fruit and vegetable skins or strings like celery strings or apple skins, humans don't have the ability to absorb that type of fiber. That's what we call insoluble fiber, and I'll talk more about that. And so if you tend to have softer or sometimes even more liquid stool, you're going to see those seeds and the corn and nuts and stuff come out in your poop because we don't really change the form of it. But again, that doesn't mean it's not good for you or that you're not doing something with it, because the fiber is good to help move things through our stool. And then when the bacteria get access to it, they do good things. But just because you see some corn or nuts or seeds doesn't mean that you're malabsorbing. And then, is it a food allergy? A lot of folks ask me if they should be tested for food allergies. And so it's important to understand, what's the difference between a food allergy and food intolerance. So a food allergy is a serious and potentially life-threatening medical condition. It happens when your immune system overreacts to a harmless food protein, or what we call an allergen. Symptoms can be mild to severe, and it can be anything from hives to minor abdominal pain to severe anaphylaxis, not being able to breathe, or just uncontrollable vomiting. It tends to happen within minutes to a few hours typically. And food allergies can often occur in families. If you know anybody that has food allergies, or you're wondering about them for yourself, FAIR, the Food Allergy Research and Education Group, has an excellent website that's referenced here on the bottom. Top food allergens tend to be milk, egg, peanut, tree nut, soy, wheat, fish, and shellfish. We currently don't have a cure for food allergies. And 1 in 10 Americans have a food allergy, but almost twice as many think they do. And food allergies are more prevalent in children. So the difference between that and a food intolerance is that a food intolerance causes people to feel discomfort after eating certain foods, but usually they involve the digestive system, not the immune system. Food intolerances like lactose intolerance, there's a picture of a glass of milk down here. Lactose intolerance is when we're missing an enzyme that helps us digest or break down the sugar in lactose or milk. but you don't, and it can make you feel really bad, gassy and bloated and all those things, but you don't get a immune response or a change in your antibody levels to food intolerances. And people with digestive disorders such as IBS or IBD, Crohn's, are more likely to have food intolerances, but you don't have to have any coexisting conditions to have a food intolerance. Food intolerances affect 15 to 20% of the population, likely higher than that based on some sources, versus only about 2% of the population which have true food allergies. And symptoms are typically bloating, excess gas, stomach pain, diarrhea, sometimes headaches or migraines, and they can be delayed hours to days after eating, depending on that digestion time. So remember, if you're getting gas or bloating from a food, it's got to get through all of those feet of intestine and down to the large intestine where the bacteria fermented before that happens. So that could be some hours, sometimes the next day. So in terms of how do we get our digestion healthier? A lot of it stems from our gut microbiome, and the gut microbiome basically refers to the genes that make up all of the microbes that live within our gastrointestinal tract. So bacteria, viruses, yeast, fungus, all of those things are collectively our gut microbiome. The majority of bacteria live in our large intestine or colon, and that's really important to know. There's not much bacteria in our small intestine. It's a pretty clean environment. We've got a valve between our small intestine and large intestine to keep those bacteria out. So they live happy and healthy down in our large intestine. Our bacterial cells outnumber human cells 10 to 1. So some say you're 90% bacteria, and you have about 2 to 6 pounds of bacteria in your large bowel or in your body. The gut microbiome is made up of beneficial and potentially harmful microbes, so they all live in there. And we're starting to learn more about the impact of diet and how quickly the diet can change our gut microbiome. There's lots and lots of research going into that. And we also have a microbiome in our mouth. We have a microbiome in our skin and reproductive microbiome. So there's lots of different populations of bacteria living in harmony in our body. So the microbiome helps regulate immune function and prevent growth of harmful microorganisms. It helps with the fermentation of indigestible foods like fibers. So again, we don't do a lot with fiber ourselves because we can't really absorb it, but the bacteria can use it and do all kinds of things. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. The microbiome influences hormone and neurotransmitter production, and also is responsible for production of vitamins B, K, and short chain fatty acids. So fun fact, there's about 300 times more bacteria in your gut than there are stars in the Milky Way. So how do we get a healthy gut microbiome? It can begin at birth. So something as simple as having a vaginal birth versus a C-section can make a difference in the microbiome of the baby. When we have vaginal delivery, they're exposed to all kinds of microbes versus C-section, which is very sterile. Breastfeeding versus bottle feeding. Again, breastfeeding exposes the baby to microbes on the mom's skin. Antibiotic use tends to sterilize things, and our modern lifestyle, we have a lot of soaps and a lot of antiseptics, and for this last couple of years, a lot of masks and goggles and everything else. And so who knows what that has done to our gut microbiome. Spending lots and lots of time indoors has changed our exposure to microbes, and the lack of beneficial bacteria in the food supply. Dishwashers probably have played a role because we get much more sterile dishes, and not that that's a bad thing, but it's a different thing over the last decades. and pet-free households. So there's studies that show that houses with pets tend to have a more diverse microbiome. So any of you guys that are holding out on your kids that are begging for pets, just figure you might have a healthier gut microbiome if you get a dog. Okay, so symptoms of an unhealthy gut microbiome, GI discomfort, persistent, consistent, upset stomach. And again, we all get gas, we all get bloating. We don't like to talk about it. It's not polite conversation, but it happens to all of us. And that can be very normal. But if you are getting more persistent and consistent, troublesome side effects, then talk to your doctor about it, because it could be, as simple as just you need a diet change, but it also could be a sign of something else like IBS or Crohn's or colitis or some other thing. Fatigue that's new and long lasting greater than 6 months can be linked to the gut microbiome. Same with weight gain and autoimmune diseases, I think, like Crohn's and colitis, and possibly even RA or MS. Skin conditions like eczema, psoriasis, seasonal allergies, environmental allergies, food allergies, depression and anxiety, migraines, and inflammation both in the gut and throughout the body. So how can we make our gut healthier? We're going to talk about each one of these components: fiber intake, the 3 Ps, prebiotic, probiotic, and polyphenols. And at the end, in the resources, one of the things that should be listed there, and if not, I'll add it. Chris Damon is one of our docs here at UW, gastroenterologist, and he has a column called, or a website, gutbites.org, and he has really great little articles on the gut microbiome. And he did one, on these first 2 items here called the 4 phonetic F's of the microbiome. So fiber and ferments for probiotics, fatty acids, and phenols, polyphenols. It starts with a P, but it's a phonetic F, and it's a great article, and he's got some really great articles. So check that out, gutbites.org. Also stress reduction, food safety, travel, medicine, and sleep. Those aren't really diet things, but they're definitely important and changes that you can make. So when it comes to fiber, there's different types of fiber. We've got insoluble fiber, which tends to be the skins and strings and seeds of fruits and vegetables and grains or nuts, apple skin, tomato seeds, that kind of thing. That type of fiber really can help relieve and prevent constipation by helping stool move through the bowel faster, so that we don't get constipated. The bacteria can use some of it for fuel as well. So, soluble fiber, on the other hand, is the inside of fruits and vegetables, grains, beans, like peeled apple or hummus or bean soup or oatmeal. And soluble fiber tends to form a gel in the intestinal tract when it gets mixed with fluid in the intestinal tract. It gets real gel-like, and it helps slow down the passage of food, which can help reduce blood sugar, blood cholesterol, might help with hunger, and it helps feed our gut bacteria. So again, we really need those fibers to keep our gut bacteria healthy and happy so they can do all those wonderful things. Okay, and then it's recommended that we have about 25 to 30 grams of fiber per day. So in your packet of slides here that you'll get, there's a list of different insoluble fibers, soluble fibers, prebiotic-rich foods, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Resistant starch, those are carbohydrates basically that are resistant to fermentation. So they're good for fueling the bacteria, but they don't ferment it as rapidly, so you don't get as much gas or problems, which some of the prebiotic-rich foods can be real gas forming. Chicory and artichokes and beans and things like that, they all have great prebiotic fibers, but they can also cause gas. There's a really good handout here from, I'm not sure if I can get it open here, from Michigan, our colleagues at Michigan on the role of fibers. So I've worked with some of the dietitians there on a committee, and they've done a really good job putting this out there. So give credit where credit is due. Except now I think I just, here we go. Sorry about that. So yeah, so check that out. And then prebiotics. What are prebiotics? So prebiotics are basically food for our probiotics. Probiotics are what we think of the gut-friendly bacteria that do the great things for us, but they need to eat. So prebiotics are, selectively fermented ingredients, basically, that allow our gut microbes to flourish, but they also provide benefits like well-being and health to the host, which is us. So prebiotics, when the probiotics feed on them, they do things like produce short chain fatty acids in the colon. And short chain fatty acids are something that's used as an energy source to fuel and maintain repair of cells in the colon, and also helps increase mucus production to protect the lining of our intestines. They enhance the growth of good strains of bacteria, and they also help regulate the immune system and decrease inflammation. So having those prebiotic foods to feed those probiotics, they're going to produce these short chain fatty acids, which are going to do really important things for us. So here's some pictures of prebiotic foods: garlic and beets and bananas and peas. And again, there's that list that had those on there for you. So they come from fiber, especially fermentable fibers. So things like oats and legumes and mushrooms, but also, where we used to think prebiotics were mostly from fibers, we now know that they come in culinary herbs and spices are a really good source of prebiotics. So the recommendation is to have about 1 to 3 teaspoons daily of dried spices, or up to 3 tablespoons daily of fresh spices. CLAs, which are conjugated linoleic acid and polyunsaturated fatty acids. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. Human milk, breast milk, and even cow's milk to some extent has carbohydrates, which can be prebiotics, and then the polyphenols. So again, here's that list of prebiotic rich foods. So things like bananas and barley and beetroot and garlic and different fruits and potatoes and spices and sweet potatoes, even tea, green and black tea have prebiotic compounds. So when you're having your morning tea, you're feeding your probiotics. Culinary herbs and spices, so things like black pepper, cayenne pepper, cinnamon, ginger, oregano, rosemary, turmeric. We hear a lot about turmeric being anti-inflammatory, but some of these other spices they have found really can have prebiotic effects and enhance the growth. In one study they looked at, it was 33 species of lactobacillus and bifidobacteria species were enhanced by using more culinary spices, and found to inhibit 88 intestinal pathogens and toxin producing bacterial strains in the lab, basically. And there's some studies down there to support that. So again, the more spices we use in our food, the healthier our gut microbiome is going to be. So CLAs and PUFAs, that conjugate nucleoleic acid, this one was a really fun one for me to find out, because so often patients say to me, oh, I eat cheese and I know that's bad, or oh, I stay away from dairy, I know that's bad. And sometimes people need to stay away from dairy because especially milk and yogurt and things that are high in lactose can sometimes cause gas and bloat for people if they're lactose intolerant, or if you have a dairy allergy, you need to stay away from it. And certainly if you have high cholesterol or you're watching your weight, you don't want to be, making cheese the mainstay of your diet. But how exciting to find out that Swiss and Colby cheese are two of the richest sources of conjugated linoleic acid, which work as food for those probiotics. So, keeping in mind that when you have a nice aged slice of cheese on something, maybe don't feel guilty about it. If you have high cholesterol, you probably shouldn't be eating it every day, according to the Heart Association. But when you have it once in a while, don't feel bad about it. It's feeding your probiotics. Same with whole milk and yogurt and sour cream, butter, cottage cheese, things like button mushrooms, pomegranate seed oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil, beef. Like we hear all the time, beef is so bad for you. But again, remember that it's not, when it comes to food, even though often we try to make it black or white, it's not black or white. Many foods have different properties. And again, there's lots of reasons to not put beef as, the center point of all of your meals. But if you have it once in a while, maybe it's actually doing something okay for you. And plus it's high in protein and things too. Nuts and seeds have lots of polyunsaturated fatty acids, peanut butter, avocado, olive oil, safflower oil. So again, there's just different sources of these fats in our food that all can have good components. And again, if you need to watch certain things for other health reasons, then you can leave those out. And it's always good, I think, to have, your diet mostly plants. Half of if you look at the My Plate by the government, half of your plate should come from plant foods and a quarter of your plate from protein foods and a quarter from starches. But within that, all of these things can fit. Okay, so this is kind of a repeat of the other slide. Probiotics, they do a lot of great things for immune system, vitamin production, help us absorb minerals better, and may help regulate certain conditions and maintain good oral and skin health. So what about probiotics in our diet? So again, we know that diet can change the microbiome composition within as little as 24 hours. It can change, but then if our diet changes back, it changes back. But if you make long-term diet changes, it can alter the microbiome permanently. I've been really concerned, and this is kind of just an observation. I cannot say that this is evidence-based or that I have a research study to back this up, but the number of patients over the last few years that have told me that they were on the keto diet or the Atkins diet or some low-carb diet, and that their gut was always pretty good until they went on that diet. And then when they started to add carbohydrates back to their diet, they started having all these belly issues. And I've talked to some of the GI doctors and said, we really need to do a study on that to find out, is that just a coincidence that I'm hearing from numbers of people now, or is there really something to it? Is something happening? When you're on a low carb diet, you're altering the amount likely of fiber that's in your diet. So could there be something to that? Other things that have changed the amount of probiotics is just the way that we sanitize things, refrigeration. When we didn't have widespread refrigeration, often people did different methods of preservation that cured their foods, where there was more fermentation and probiotics in that, or just for brined or fermented foods in general. We've seen that in Japan, for example, when they started getting more widespread refrigeration, sanitation, they don't eat as many naturally fermented foods as they used to. And, those changes can change the gut microbiome. The fact that we use so many packaged foods where the fiber and nutrients have been stripped out of it, and there's nothing about them that's alive, has changed access to probiotics in our diet too. People used to shop and cook daily, and everything was very fresh compared to now. We tend to leave things in refrigeration longer and use frozen things and packaged things and all of those. So again, the more we can kind of get back to buying things fresher and using them. If I had a dime for every time a patient said to me, well, I like fruits and vegetables, but I buy them and they go bad because you're not eating them. So buy them and eat them and get the nutrition out of them. Okay, so probiotics are used, are found in foods worldwide. So this is just a slide that talks about some of the different foods worldwide. So if you want to be adventurous and try things from other cultures, these are great probiotic-rich foods to try. And then fermented, and this, I apologize, there's an error on the slide. This is should say fermented versus vinegar. This is not the best slide, but this is an example of something that's fermented the way it used to be versus the way we make things now. So the label on the left, these Bubby's kosher pickles, these are a true fermented pickle. If you look at the ingredients, it's hard to see. There's cucumbers, water, salt, garlic, dill, spices, mustard seed, and some calcium added for preservative. That and they let those pickles sit, and they develop the bacteria, and the lactic acid they prevent or make cause the pickles to be sour or fermented. Whereas you look at the label on the right, this is one brand. I can't remember if it was Nally's or Farman or which one, but this is kind of the way most of the pickles are in the store now. It's cucumbers, water, vinegar, salt, and then calcium and garlic and so on. And the difference, when you notice this, this would be true of pickles and sauerkraut and even sourdough bread. When you see vinegar added to a product, it means that it's the vinegar that's making it sour. It's not a fermented process that's making it sour. They're cheating by adding vinegar. So most of the pickles and sauerkraut and thing out there now are not really truly fermented foods. They're vinegar foods. And like I said, you can look at kind of the same thing for sourdough bread, a good authentic sourdough bread that has lots of probiotics in it. Lots of bacteria is going to cause lots of fermentation, which makes it sour. And if they have to add vinegar to that sourdough bread, they're cheating. It means they didn't ferment it long enough. So look for sourdough breads. Trader Joe's has a great one that's a truly fermented bread that doesn't need to have vinegar added to it. Firefly Kitchens in West Seattle has a great line of fermented vegetables, different krauts and things. And they have a great cookbook too on using their products, but also on how to make them yourself at home. So if you really want to get into learning how to do your own fermented vegetables, they're a great local resource. And then other probiotic rich foods, omasaki is a fermented drink. Beer, believe it or not, is a probiotic rich food. And again, not that you want that to be your main source of probiotics, but once in a while, black or oolong tea, green tea, buttermilk cheese, chocolate, coconut kefir, coffee, and cottage cheese, fermented sausages and meats. My Italian husband was so excited to know that the dry salami he loves to have at the holidays actually has some fermented probiotics in it. Fermented vegetables, kefir, kimchi, kombucha, lemon, miso, natto, olives, pickles, pulque, vinegars, and raw whey, root and ginger beers that are authentically produced. Sauerkraut, again, that's really brine cured, not with vinegar. Sourdough breads, traditionally made, tempeh, wheatgrass juice, wine, and yogurt. Okay, and then other fermented foods, miso soup, interestingly enough, they've found has 160 or more strains of different types of beneficial bacteria in it. Even things like sausage and pepperoni that are dry cured have some fermented probiotics. Kombucha, there's sparkling probiotic drinks out there that are pretty good. Kavita, Olipop. Honey has 13 different strains of bacteria in it. black and green tea, poi. When you're in Hawaii, have some poi. And bread in general actually is something that's got microbes in it because of the yeast in it. And interestingly enough, that sourdough bread, because those bacteria ferment all of that flour out here in the bowl, there's less of that in the finished bread. So there's less for the bacteria in our large bowel to ferment. And often people that don't tolerate bread very much because it gives them gas, tolerate sourdough bread better because it's less fermentable. Now, if you have celiac disease, that's a very different thing. That's gluten. But for people that feel like they just get gassy from wheat, try sourdough, an authentic one. It might be helpful. Okay, and then supplements. I'm going to make this a real short conversation because there's not really strong enough science yet to reliably use probiotics for specific disease control. They're really working at it and looking to see if there's certain strains that are predominant. They've seen that there's certain strains that can be predominant in IBD, for example, Crohn's or colitis, but knowing how to then take that and say, okay, we need to give this particular strain to this person in this amount. We're not there yet. And then we don't know the ramifications of altering that one thing. So there's lots and lots of studies. Generally, it's safe to take probiotic. Probably the two most researched strains are Culturelle and Align. Those are over-the-counter ones. But the American Gastroenterological Association found limited evidence for their use in many conditions. And our own gastroenterologist Cynthia Coe was on the panel for that. So you actually can look up that study and see how they graded the evidence for different conditions. And it's really pretty interesting. Okay, so another thing about probiotic supplements, they're not regulated by the FDA. In one study, only 1 out of 14 probiotic supplements actually contained what was listed on the label. So you don't quite know what you're getting. Culturelle and Align, again, are the ones that seem to have the most studies behind them. If you want to experiment with it, start with a small dosage, work up. Sometimes taking probiotics can make people more gassy because you're adding more bacteria. And one lecture I listened to not too long ago, they were suggesting because our gut microbiome is so diverse, maybe instead of taking the same probiotic over and over and over and over again, maybe you take one type of probiotic for a little while and then take another probiotic once you run out of that one, and then take another one. And again, see, does it do anything for you? Does it make you feel better? Does it make you feel worse? Because we don't really exactly know what the ramifications are going to be. There is a great app that you can get. It's the Probiotic Guide USA that goes through the different probiotic supplements and tells you about them and what's in them and all of that. So if you're interested in those, look at the app. Okay, so polyphenols, what are they? They're one of those 3 Ps. So they're compounds naturally found in plant foods like herbs, spices, tea, dark chocolate, red wine, fruits, and vegetables. They act as antioxidants to help neutralize free radicals, which can damage cells and increase risk of things like diabetes, cancer, heart disease. They may help reduce inflammation, which can be the root cause of many chronic illnesses. And there's thousands of polyphenols, including flavonoids, which we hear about a lot, which are in red cabbage or red onions, capsaicinoids in chili peppers, resveratrol in red wine or purple grape juice, ellagic acid, which is in berries, curcumin, which is in turmeric, even lignans. There's a lot of talk, don't eat lignans, but it turns out lignans in flax seeds and whole grains and things actually have polyphenols in them, which the bacteria can use. So sources of polyphenols, again, they may help promote growth of probiotic microbes, green tea, red wine, apples, onions, chocolate, ginseng. And a study they looked at tend to increase the lactobacilli and bifidobacteria versions of probiotics and decrease pathogenic strains of probiotics. So getting away from food things for a minute, stress reduction. They've found that stress really can have an impact on the composition and the function of the gut microbiome. That fight or flight mechanism that increases adrenaline and cortisol, um, increased levels of those can decrease digestive activity. So we know that stress may make the intestines more permeable, which can activate pro-inflammatory responses. And in a 2018 review, they found that depressed people had increased levels of bacteria associated with poor health. So different strains of bacteria that are not as beneficial. So it's useful to try to eat in an anti-inflammatory type diet, like the Mediterranean style diet has so many good antioxidants, rich foods, and omega-3 fatty acids. They've found that that can be helpful in stress reduction. So again, eating lots of plants, that should always be the base of our diet. Improve sleep habits, exercise, do something every day that brings you joy. Make a list of those things. Sometimes if you're having a not so great day, it's hard to think about what brings you joy. So have it written down and on your phone, your refrigerator, somewhere where you can look at that and then be able to pick one of those things, to do easily. Meditation, counseling, there's apps. There's one called IBS, what's actually called Mahana IBS app. That's a very good one for stress reduction, and it's clinically researched for helping those with IBS. Nerva app is something that a lot of my patients have told me that they use and find helpful. So those can all help with stress. And then sleep. Making sure you get enough sleep is important because your circadian rhythm, your body's internal clock, is important, and gut bacteria have a circadian rhythm too. So we know that disrupting the normal sleep wake cycle may alter the gut microbiome. So, and that can cause all kinds of problems. So, making sure that you try to get regular sleep is important. That's my little dog Princess. This is my shameful promotion of my cat Carmelo. They have no problem sleeping. You can help your sleep by avoiding artificial light exposure. So especially things like phones and tablets and TV, turn those off and, let yourself naturally go to sleep. Spend time outdoors every day. Get at least 7 to 8 hours of sleep every night. Avoid eating late at night within 3 to 4 hours of bedtime. That's good for those of you that have reflux too. And then there's a good app called Insight Timer that has lots of little fun things to do before bed to kind of help you get sleepy. Food safety and travel. Basically, in a nutshell, we don't think about food poisoning and, whether it be at home or travel as much as we used to. There used to be travel medicine clinics and things like this, but we know that now that as many as 1 in 9 people that get food poisoning end up getting IBS or irritable bowel syndrome. And food poisoning causing IBS, and then IBS can be linked to something called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So if you remember, I said that usually there's the small intestine is a very clean environment. There's not a lot of bacteria. It's all in the large bowel. Well, Dr. Mark Pimentel down at Cedars-Sinai has written a book called The Microbiome Connection, but more importantly, he has had a lab where he studied IBS and SIBO for decades. And he's found that when people get food poisoning, like salmonella, for example, then the salmonella releases this toxin, CDTB, which can then affect the nerve pathways. That basically can cause some gut damage to the gut nerves. And that can allow the bacteria to come from the large bowel back up into the small bowel. And there's a link with that with IBS. So again, there's, we could do a whole hour or more on this, but the bottom line is really thinking about your food safety, especially when you're traveling. Research where you're going, make sure that you're not eating food that's been sitting at room temperature. Avoid raw produce, including salads. If you're traveling outside of the country where you're not sure about the food, be careful with foods from unknown street or roadside vendors. If you have to ask if the water's safe, I probably wouldn't drink it. Try to use sealed containers for drinks. Wash your hands. Stash non-perishable items in your carry-on, all of those kinds of things. And at home, make sure that you treat leftovers properly in terms of how you reheat them, keeping raw foods away from, like fruits and vegetables, away from raw meat. It's really something that you can, in some cases prevent. Other times you don't have any access to it. I'm not going to talk a lot about this because this is prescriptive, but I mentioned IBS. And the reason why I want to mention IBS and FODMAPs is because everybody is finding the FODMAP diet online now. And the FODMAP diet is a diet that helps you avoid foods that are very fermentable by those bacteria down in the gut, and they can cause more gas and bloating. And so for people with IBS and certain conditions, it can be helpful to go on a low FODMAP diet. But the bottom line is it's meant to be a short-term diet. It's meant to be weeks, not months. And in the last month, I have seen people that have been on this diet for 2 to 4 years now. And that is not the intent. We know that the gut microbes we have in our large intestine need fermentable carbohydrates to be healthy and in turn boost our health. And studies are showing that people that go on these low FODMAP diets for long periods of time are having a change in their gut microbiome. So again, if you think that it might be useful to go on a low FODMAP diet, please contact a dietitian, because what we'll do is we'll put you on it for a short period of time, see if it helps you, and then start trying to work foods back into your diet, because we want your diet to be as inclusive, especially of those prebiotic fibers, as it can be. And in here, there's some list of high and low FODMAP foods. Like I said, I'm not going to get into that because I don't want to encourage people to be on this diet if they don't need to be. It's just I'm hearing it more and more and more, and there's a good way to do it and a not so great way to do it. Other gut microbiome altering ingredients: maltodextrin, carrageenan, carboxymethylcellulose, polysorbate 80, sucralose, xanthan gum, things that are in packaged foods. And there are starting to be some studies that show that certain ones can affect the mucus layer in our gut. There's been evidence that some of these things can cause cellular inflammation in the cells of the colon or the intestine. Many of these are studies in mice. People are not mice, but the bottom line is, should our diet really include large amounts of these packaged foods, and is it necessary? And the bottom line is no. If we can do more fresh foods, more fruits and vegetables, not as many packaged things, your gut likely is going to be healthier, and maybe other parts of your body too. So putting it all together, say it again, eat more plants. Studies have shown that the more varieties of plants that you have, the more diverse your gut microbiome. And they suggest at least 30 different varieties a week. I counted last week and I only had 23. And so it's like, I need to try some more different types of fruits and vegetables. And my husband was like, but I like to eat my carrot every day. And it's like, that's fine. You can eat your carrot every day, but we also should try to eat some different ones that we don't always eat. So diversity is helpful in the diet as well. Spend more time outdoors, open your windows so that air and germs and all kinds of things come in from outdoors, not just your sterile environment with the air filters inside. Get a dog or cat. Your children will thank me. Play in the dirt, garden, go outside, do things where you get dirty. We don't do that as much anymore. Practice stress management. Engage in regular exercise. This is my tennis team. I have to tell you we made it to nationals. We leave for Orlando, Florida, October 23rd. So I'm really excited. So exercise, it does great things for your body, for your mind. And it's, if you find a team sport, even that's really fun for social things too. Include probiotic and fermented foods. Make sure you get lots of omega-3 fats to reduce inflammation. So seafood and flaxseed and pumpkin seed and omega-3 eggs, those are all things that are high in omega-3 fats. Reduced intake of processed foods, artificial sweeteners, thickeners, emulsifiers. Again, eat more plants. And, if you already know that you have GI symptoms, try keeping a food and symptom journal to track, how what you eat makes you feel. There's a great app called the Care app that helps you track your food, your poo, your symptoms, everything. And then it graphs it for you and you can take it and show it to your doctor. Make sure that you talk to your doctor about any symptoms that are consistent and persistent and a change for you. And please, ask to see a registered dietitian because we want to help you eat more foods, not take away more foods. So it can be very helpful for you. All right, so questions.
All right. I did see a couple of questions earlier on as folks write it down or raise their hands. There was a question that happened at the very beginning. Is tiredness and fatigue a symptom of food allergies?
Not usually. Again, food allergies tend to cause more kind of rapid response symptoms. But with that said, I mean, like celiac disease is kind of considered like a food allergy, but not really. So, I mean, there's gray areas of that. But I mean, I guess if you have checked your diet to see, are there changes that you need to make in terms of eating more nutritiously, and you've talked with your doctor and you've had blood work checked to make sure you're not anemic or that your blood sugar is not high or your thyroid's not low or other things, then whether or not food allergy testing at that point would make sense. It wouldn't hurt to do it. I don't know that it would be a high yield situation, but could try it.
Great. The next question up is, I've heard the gut has its own nervous system. What can be done when there is a brain-gut breakdown that leads to unexplained nausea and vomiting, sometimes associated with stress? This can be known medical causes, and known medical causes is ruled out via testing or colonoscopy, radioactive egg testing, or blood tests.
So, well, just to clarify, I'm not a doctor, so you definitely want to make sure that you've worked with your doctor. It sounds like in this case, there's been lots of testing to try to rule out things. If they haven't looked at, stress reduction, or you haven't looked at stress reduction, then like I said, some of those apps have been really helpful. Working with a counselor can be really helpful for stress reduction. If that seems like there is a connection with anxiety and stress, those are probably pieces that need to be incorporated. And then I think, again, I can't emphasize enough the importance of eating a diet that's a whole foods diet with lots of plants and lots of vitamins and minerals in those foods, because we know that, making sure you have enough B vitamins and even having a very low vitamin D level, if your vitamin D level is very deficient, that can affect mental health. So, kind of looking at all those components together to see if that helps.
And thank you. The next question is about probiotics in miso soup. We understand that heat kills probiotic. How do they survive in hot soups?
So actually there was a study, I believe it was out of Japan, not too terribly long ago, that probiotics don't have to be live in live form to actually get benefit from them. And, there's been debate over the years, do you need a live probiotic, do the pills, all those things. And it turns out there's actually some benefit from both ways.
Great. For older folks, how does reduced acid in stomach affect digestion?
Well, I mean, if you don't have enough stomach acid, then you may not be breaking down food as well. But I guess I would ask the question, are you assuming you don't have enough stomach acid, or has somebody verified that? Because that would be, again, more of a medical thing you would really want to talk with your doctor about. What are your signs and symptoms? What are the signs and symptoms that suggest that you're not digesting your food correctly?
Great. And the next question we have is, how does one know whether they have IBS or just gas? Frequent gas.
Well, there's actually a test now called, I think it's called the IBS Smart Test, that it actually can identify whether it's IBS or not. That's one of the things I believe Dr. Pimentel out of Cedars-Sinai that his lab came up with. But the way I think of it, kind of, I guess, in more broad terms, like I said, we all get gas and bloating when we eat, certain foods. But if you're having gas and bloating and distension daily, and it's interfering with your life, and it's painful, and it doesn't seem like it's normal for you, or again, if it's really uncomfortable and really painful and persistent and consistent, you want to talk with your doctor about that. And then they'll do the various tests to make sure, is it IBS, or is it something with your pancreas, or do you have bacterial overgrowth, or could you have Crohn's, or is it indeed just what they call functional dyspepsia, where they can't really find a reason for different complaints.
Great. It's very interesting that now there's a test out. So fantastic developments there. Are there any other questions regarding, I think we can take one more. Just a reminder, we will be sending out the slides as well as the recording to everyone who's registered. Yeah. Great. And since we are at the top of the hour, we can certainly begin to start wrapping things up. Thank you so much, Diane. This has been a fantastic seminar. We have your contact information there so if folks have any follow-up questions or just want to get in touch with you. There's our email, there's the email and phone number.
Yes.
Thank you. And we'll be sending out again the slides very shortly.
All right. Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you, everyone.